Everybody, welcome back to 10% True. And if you're new to the channel, welcome to 10% True. Thanks for joining us. You're here to take part or listen to a very interesting, I hope, live stream session that's a bit of an experiment for the channel. We haven't done this before, but having had the good fortune of sitting in a room with a bunch of old fighter guys talking, well, some of them are fairly young, it's interesting to see what sort of conversations come out of that. So I thought if I could get some guys together and have somebody who flew the aeroplane host it and moderate it, then we might end up with some pretty good viewing. And so to that end, a couple of just announcements or admin pieces. Just wanted to say thank you to Hacker for being prepared to do this. He's been a good friend for a long time. And I'm very grateful to him for being willing to take part in this and front things. And also thanks to the panel of guests who will introduce themselves to you in a minute. Because this is a bit experimental, we'll see how it goes. But I do like the idea generally of having a guest who's had experience flying tactical fast jets come and host the channel. So if you have somebody in mind that you'd like to come along and do this, either as a one-to-one with somebody else or with a similar panel to this, then also drop a note in the comments, and I'll take notice of that. So finally, before I hand over to Hacker, the perpetual ask, which is that if you like this, please like it in YouTube, give it the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share it with people that you think would be interested in it. And if you're listening to it on the podcast, which won't be live, and you won't, of course, get any video, please like the channel and leave a comment. I'm trying to get to the #1 aviation podcast in the UK. I'm #3 at the moment. I think I'm #12 in the US. It'd be good to get that as an objective as well. But it's not enough for you to just listen to it and like it. You have to then feedback into the process as well. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand over to Hacker now, and I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Well, thanks, Steve. As you were just giving me the intro there, it just struck me that, the very first time that I met you, Steve, and did an interview with you back in 2000, I think, the same thing that happened to me there happened to me with this podcast, and that is, I think I told you this on my previous appearance on your show, that I had just come back from flying. I was in the rockets at Seymour and came back from a flight and dumped all my junk off in life support. And I was walking down the hall, and my squadron commander, somebody you may know, Junior, Randy Roberts, was all the way at the end of the hall, and he goes, "Hacker, what are you doing right now?" And I said, "Nothing, whatever you want." And he said, "Come over here." So he told me I was going to have to go talk to this journalist from the UK. So that was the first time I met you there. And that's kind of how that happened, that you set me up to be the moderator of this thing here today. So I think I was telling you I was going to be in Cambridge on a work trip, and you said, "Surprise, you're gonna host the panel podcast." So yeah, thank you for letting me have the helm here. We've got a great panel of folks to talk to you tonight. Some of whom you know, some of whom you may have never heard from. I don't know. But the interesting thing is that we all span the entire operational history of the mighty MACD Warhorse. And kind of the intention here tonight is in the spirit of the name of the 10% True channel, right? So for those of you that don't know, that comes from an Air Force fighter bar rule that any story that you tell in the bar has to be at least 10% true for you to tell it. And I'm sure we'll verge on that limitation with some of the stuff that we talk about here tonight, knowing the varied folks that we have to tell their stories. So without further ado, we'll go to introduce the folks on the panel. Let's Junior Summonsby, stand up and tell us about yourself.
Okay, so my history, first the Earth began to cool, which is about the time I joined the Air Force. I came out of the F-111 in 1988. The call sign is directly tied to being the only slick wing captain in the Strike Eagle initial cadre. So I was the youngest guy to fly the jet when I first flew it. Did a tour as an RTU instructor there at Luke, and then went up to Alaska in '91 as part of the PACAF initial cadre. Shortly after I got there, was selected to weapons school, went to Nellis in the first full-size weapons school class, and graduated in '92. Got my patch, went back to Alaska, and was the squadron weapons officer in the 90th Fighter Squadron, and then the chief of wing weapons. After that, great job. We had C models and E models, worked a lot of integration between the two platforms in the wing there. Went off to school, went to the Pentagon, went back to flying at Lakenheath as the 492nd Commander, which I think almost everybody on this podcast flew in the bowlers, so that's awesome. Great squadron, best job in the world. And then I went on for another 10 years of my career doing a bunch of different things, and finally retired in 2012 with 30 years and 17 days, but who's counting? My last sortie in the airplane was in 2008. I got a pity sortie with the 492nd when I was the USAFE EIG, and went out and had a great sortie with Tonto Silveria. So anyway, that's my story. Thanks.
Well, welcome. Thanks. All right. Next up, we've got Wham Rezner.
Yeah, I'm Wham. I started flying the jet back in 2014. So when I went to the B course, first ops assignment was in the bowlers at Lakenheath with Stinger, and Paco was actually my first weapons officer. Yeah, I got to deploy twice out of there, then went to the Eagles to teach at the FTU, got picked up for WIC, graduated from 19 Bravo, and then I was the weapons officer for the Eagles for a little bit, and walked across the street and was with Stinger and was the weapons officer of the Rockets. From there, went back and taught at the weapons school, and that was my last assignment. And now I'm at school at ACSC.
Which I'm sure is you're just going to look back and consider the best assignment of your career, no doubt.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrible.
All right.
Wham, it's good to see you.
We want to hear some ACSC stories.
Careful. I'm sure there's some, 2-star, who the best tour of his entire career was ACSC who's watching this. So, all right. Next up, Stinger Fischel.
Yep. So started flying civilian stuff, got into the Air Force, went in as a Wizzo. Went to the B course around about the same time as Wham. Went to the bowlers. Really lucky to go to the bowlers. Had a phenomenal ops tour there. Paco was there. He was our patch, and it was a great group of pipe hitters there. Went to pilot training from there at Shepherd, and then dropped strikes. Went back to the Rockets and did an ops tour with the Rockets there. Wham was there, and then went to the F-35, and now I'm just a F-35 instructor at the F-35 FTU at Eglin.
And you do some pretty cool stuff outside on the side, right?
Yeah, I've managed to work some good deals and kind of be a parasite for some real good stuff. So I'm thankful for that for sure.
Good. Well, maybe we'll have another podcast and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm someone who probably needs no introduction to the majority of the internet out here, Paco Benitez.
Well, I don't know about that. Maybe a small fraction of a corner or something. Yeah, I'm Paco. Wham, nice to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. It's been a while. So Stinger, I see you all the time. We live in the same area, and we drink a lot together. So, anyways, I came in B course in the Lancers 2007. Went across the street to the Rockets. Was there for 2 deployments in 2009 and then 10 and 11. Went to the Eagles, so I couldn't reach escape velocity at Seymour. So 3rd assignment then in the Eagles. Taught in the Eagles. Went to weapons school out of the Eagles. And then after that, got assigned to the bowlers, was in the bowlers for about 3.5 years. Did about 3.5 years of non-flying stuff. So I got to work in the Pentagon. I actually got to go work in Congress for a senator as an active duty person, which is pretty interesting. Some fellowships in DARPA and Silicon Valley. Came back to the jet. And this is where it gets a little weird. Went to operational test, but in Florida, not at Nellis. So the little non-standard operational test, got to fly some DT and OT. And I wrapped up my last 3.5 years flying dual qualled in the E and the EX. So I got about 50-50 time between the two, my last flying assignment. So thanks.
Right on. Good to have you out here. And that's it. Again, I feel humbled to be among this group out here. I'm probably the least accomplished aviator of any of you guys. So it's pretty cool to be with you tonight. For those of you who don't know me, Hacker Haskin, I guess I'm a late rated guy. I started out as a maintenance officer coming out of RTC, did 2 tours in the strike, first one with the Rockets at Seymour, and then with the bowlers, just like everybody else here. In between that, I was an IFF instructor in the T-38, then a UPT instructor in the T-38 Advance. I did a tour and a half, I guess, doing MC-12s, and finished off my career as a U-2 mission planner up in Beale. So we all have pretty widely varied careers here. It's been pretty interesting to see the way that different people's career paths can go when we all kind of start from a very similar place. So looking forward to kind of the discussion out here. I want to start, Junior, with you. And this is just kind of a question based on my experiences coming to the Strike Eagle 10 years after you. I started in 99. So I'm sort of the, I guess, time frame wise linchpin here in between the three of you guys that were all in the bowlers together later on, and Junior, you starting at the very beginning of the airplane's history. I really distinctly remember getting to the airplane again as a brand new guy, where the 04s and 05s and 06s were all previous background 111 and F4 guys, and the guys who were my captain and major, my weapons officers and my line kind of flight leads were Strike Eagle babies. And there was a notable cliquishness about kind of where your background was from, and that informed a lot of how you chose to employ the airplane and how you advocated for tactics to be executed. Junior, how was it for you coming out of the 111, even as a young guy out of the 111, and into a brand new airplane that obviously took from an aircraft, heritage from an aircraft that didn't have any substantial air-to-ground component, and now you've got guys who are coming from all of these different locations. What was that like? And then kind of the follow-on to that, especially when you got to weapons school, and the timing of that, especially after the experiences of Desert Storm, how did that sort of coalesce into forming sort of a unique Strike Eagle identity?
Well, there's a 2.5-hour answer to that, and it's the the podcast that I did with Steve a couple of years ago. Well, for starters, it was the greatest thing in the world. I mean, the 111 was a captive weapons system, 4 operational bases. One guy who got to go to Australia, a handful of people that did test at McClellan. That was it. I mean, and you were just going to live your life in that world. So when I went to the Strike Eagle, I was the guy that made it over the wall and escaped that community. The first of many more to follow. It was, as I said in the long session with Steve, talking about bringing the airplane online. Yes, it was. You had a lot of people. Now, I'll start by saying there were 32 guys in the initial cadre. 27 of them were patch wearers. I was one of the ones that wasn't. I went to weapons school later in the Strike Eagle. So if you can imagine a squadron with 27 patch wearers and how many strong opinions you have, but that was part of the beauty of it. I mean, we fought to the death over absolutely everything because everybody thought they were right. Turned out I actually was right, but it took. It was harder to prove that since I was a slick wing captain and didn't have a patch. So, but all of that. Knocking heads, eventually got to, okay, we've all got to settle on what's the best way to do this. The other aspect of it, and so we don't forget to say this on this podcast, shout out to all the folks from Lake and Heath, from the Panthers and the Chiefs that just got a whole bunch of medals here a few days ago for the great work they did slaying drones coming out of Iran. How the airplane was going to be employed air to air. Early on, I was at Luke. We were the west of the Mississippi Strike Eagle community. And a lot of our leadership, all of our squadron command leadership were all Eagle guys. They were, a lot of them had been flying, I would say C models, but most of them were actually A models at Luke, and came over and became Strike Eagle commanders. In fact, there was a lot of resentment early on from some of the F4 and 111 guys, like, are we ever going to get a chance to be squadron commanders? So we had very much an air-to-air flavor. Now, as Yogi Allred and some others who've done podcasts with Steve will tell you, when they got to Seymour, they were told in no uncertain terms, you are dual role day and night bombing. Period. Dot. We don't want to hear about air to air, and that was a huge divide. And there were guys that couldn't wait to get out of Seymour and come back to Luke as RTU instructors, because we there was a lot of air to air in the syllabus, And we embraced that, and we were prescient. We said the day is going to come when they're going to need the Strike Eagle, a platform with 8 missiles, to go out there and do air-to-air. And in fact, it didn't take long. Right after Desert Storm, Strike Eagles were flying caps in Iraq. And then, as you guys know all too well, there was a period there where there was no air threat, and it was all CAS. But the airplane still got a lot of air-to-air capability, and I think all of us embrace that. Even guys coming out of the 111, just because we hadn't done air-to-air didn't mean we didn't want to do it. When you were given a capability like a Strike Eagle and an APG-70, we were all about it. So it was a great transition. There really wasn't. At least at Luke, there was no sense that we're going to fly. This is replacing the F-111, even though that in the Air Force's mind, it might have been the all-weather fighter replacement for the 111. We never had a sense that we're going to go out and fly it like an F-111. We're going to go out and fly it like an Eagle and try to get as much capability as we possibly can out of the jet. Now, when our students went off to Seymour, they were under the thumb of some senior leadership that said, we're not going to lose one of these airplanes doing air-to-air. So, that you're going to do the bare minimum of air-to-air. But I think, time has proven that, that capability is resident in the airplane. You can't afford to ignore it. The limitation, as you all know, is training time. You only get so many sorties in a quarter or a half or whatever. And you can't do CAS and PGMs and, air-to-air and all of those things. You just can't stay proficient in all of those missions all of the time. You got to prioritize based on what you think your next challenge is going to be. So
Stinger's got a fantastic air-to-air story, which I'm sure we'll get to later.
I promise you'll get to tell that story. He wants his time in the sun too. But just for bracket on that, Junior, even in 2000, 2001, where OCA and DCA were already on the doc statements. I remember going to a red flag in 2001 where the Chiefs were the OCA of the entire vol, and I was in the Rockets, and we were the DCA airplanes. So there was a lot of harumphing about that even 10 years later. So Paco, now I get to switch to you. You just went through the initial stages of bringing a similarly new airframe online, but not nearly as many differences in terms of doctrine, but differences in terms of capability and where you fit into this new world of Gen 4, Gen 4 plus, Gen 5 kind of airplanes. So I know not specifically Strike Eagle related, but EX is sort of on the same path there. What have you seen so far? And obviously not from an operational level, but just as far as bringing something new with your background online.
Ooh, great question. And, as Junior was telling his story about kind of bringing these different communities together, it actually is the exact same thing that's happening with the F-35. And Stinger can tell you some really good stories about all the eclectic community instructor cadre that he flies with. And they all have different backgrounds. They're all thinking things a little bit different. But from the E to the EX, one of the things that we did in test, we actually started with, before the EX had even come by, we had C models and E models in test. And all of the pilots, almost all of them, ended up getting dual qualified. So you can fly a C model on Monday, E model on Tuesday. And so you had guys with C model backgrounds flying E models, you guys with E model backgrounds flying C models. And there's, a top off course that they kind of went through to go get the qualification. So when the EX came down, we're like, well, it's different enough, like from the C model to the EX, massive jump from the E model to the EX. Some differences, obviously different engines, different displays, the how you do the HOTAS is a little bit different, and there's extra stuff in the jet, we'll say. But there was a conversation about, do we need to tri-qual pilots and dual qual WISOs? And that's exactly what we ended up doing. So it was Duke Lindemann was working that pretty hard. He was the commander at the time back then. We have tri-qualed F-15 guys in test. So you fly the C, the E, and the EX, and it just depends on what's on the schedule. So the day before I'm flying this jet this day, and so one of the good things that came out of that is it as the C model kind of suns down and transitions to the EX, even at the weapons school, and Wham can probably weigh in here, the 433rd used to be kind of the air dominance division of the weapons school. And it had, it was a C model WIC, Satan's Angels, and then they got the Raptor. And now as the C model is going away and the EX is coming online, that those people are shifted over to the Strike Eagle weapons school now. So traditional C model units, as they get the EX, like those people are going to start going through the F-15E and EX weapons school. So I think Wham probably put through a couple of C model students that were test guys that came back to test afterwards. But yeah, bringing those communities together has been awesome because the considerations of how you kind of bring those together, and especially as you have different mentalities. Like one of the things that's still going on when the C model guys want to fly the EX, and there's certain things they want it to evolve to do. Simple things like, hey, I want the switch to do this. Well, we have to tell them like, well, the switch can't do that because it serves like 17 other functions on the multi-role side that you haven't considered. And so there's this acknowledgement like, hey, the jet is like wildly complex and it could do a lot of things. And so it's been a really good experience.
It's interesting to hear that now. That sounds like there's almost a merging sort of the fourth gen worlds as the rest of the world moves kind of on with the fifth gen stuff there.
Yeah, to an extent. Yeah.
Stinger, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier in terms of kind of how the fifth gen world thinks versus how the fourth gen world thinks. Paco, do you have any guys with either Raptor or Lightning experience that were kind of in the pot as far as figuring out how to fly the EX?
No, I think those are pretty much one-way doors going from fourth to fifth gen, just the way that those communities are growing. So I can't think of a single person who's gone from fifth to fourth. Yeah, I can't think of any.
Good. Well, thanks for that. That's kind of the alpha and the omega of the Strike Eagle world as it is right now, isn't it? Junior, I want to kind of hop back to you for a second. And again, something that I think is very unique for your experience level is just being being part of that sort of first Strike Eagle weapon school group. I was curious how not only you as a student, but when you're a student in it, you're obviously part of the development of the tactics as well. How did you were at the 90th during Desert Storm? Is that true?
No, I was at Luke during Desert Storm.
Oh, okay.
Which was the most painful thing in the world, watching all of your former students go off and fight a war. Literally guys that we had graduated like a month before were deploying and we're like, no. It was hard.
Well, so how did that, the collision of all that stuff, how did that sort of come together when you were in WIC as a student?
Well, what I was hoping to do was to go to Nellis, go through weapons school and stay as an instructor. And originally there were going to be four people in that first class. And I think my odds were pretty good that I was going to be one of those four people. Then for whatever reason, they dialed it back to two. And of course, Desert Storm had intervened and they're like, okay, if we're going to get two instructors, they probably need to be war veterans. So the two guys in the validation class both came out of Seymour, right after Desert Storm. So I was, when I say the first full size class, we were the first group of guys that were going to go through and not stay there at Nellis. So it was a learning experience for everybody. I got to be careful. I don't know if maybe Steve can tell me whether Yogi Allred is listening to this, so I'll be careful what I say. But the Yogi was one of my, and Yogi's a great instructor. But the instructors were still figuring out what the syllabus was going to look like at weapons school, and there were the instructors really didn't have that much more experience than we did. I mean, we started flying the airplane at about the same time. And so in some cases, we had considerably more. We had one instructor had come over from the C model, one had come over from the A-10. So they were relatively new to the strike, great, expertise in their particular area, but not nearly as much experience in the airplane as we did. And it varied a little bit depending on the instructor. Some of them were kind of like, okay, I'm new to this, I'm learning, let's kind of dig in, figure out what's the best way to skin this cat. Others
think
were a
I've
little more
ever heard a
defensive, like
patchwear say that.
I'm the instructor, and
I've never heard a patchwear say this. I'm new to this. I don't know what I'm doing.
yeah. You don't hear that a lot, admittedly. But it was, it was a good experience. I mean, there was some knocking, there was still the student instructor dynamic, and that was, whenever you're on the student side of that, you wind up getting a little frustrated at times. But at the end of the day, it was, it was a good experience. We were. They were still, like, for example, we didn't get to drop a GBU-15. There were certain things that were it was so new that they just didn't have the resources to do all that. But other than that, I think we flew every ride that was in the syllabus. So, but a good learning experience. But there's no doubt, talking to guys that went through weapon school later on, it got smoother and smoother as time went on. I think Steve was looking to eventually do a session with Yogi specifically about the weapon school and standing it up.
It's funny you say GBU-15 was so new. Wham, when you came into the B course, we had already retired that, right?
Yeah, I have honestly no idea what that is. I think that was well before me.
I was qualified on that for a while in the Rockets.
I remember when I watched the episode that Steve did with Yogi and Steve Turner. I remember being stunned as they were talking about dropping Rockeye on the first night of Desert Storm. I'm like, God damn, were we really still dropping Rockeye and dumb Mark 82s in 1991? Yeah, we were. It's easy to forget once you get into the PGM world. It's easy to forget there was an era where we were dropping dumb bombs. And that, in fact, when I was just kind of making some notes to myself last night, that when we first started flying the airplane, it was dumb bombs. I mean, that was it. It wasn't, we were 2 years into the, standing up the RTU before we get targeting pods. I mean, the targeting pod basically came out during Desert Storm. A lot of guys, they got their checkout with the targeting pod in the theater, in Desert Storm, and there's only enough to have one on the lead jet or whatever. So there was a lot of buddy lazing and stuff going on, and so that kind of introduced a new era of PGMs. And then about the time when I was at Lake and Heath as a squadron commander, we brought in NVGs, and that again was a whole new era. And now, of course, we've got a whole nother generation of weapons out there that. So, I think you can kind of carve up the history of the airplane into distinct eras depending on what your primary munitions are.
Hacker, I want to weigh in real quick. I know you're the moderator, but I'm going to throw something back at you so we can talk to you and let you tell us about yourself. So you were in the Rockets in OIF, right?
That's right. Yeah, I got to the Rockets in 2000. I was there till 2003.
So you were, and you deployed with Buster Jaime, right? Which funny call sign.
That's true.
Yeah, so he had some really great stories about night one in OIF. But you guys were flying like 9 GBU-12 loadouts because like GPS guided weapons weren't even on the jet. Like we didn't get GPS guided weapons on the Strike Eagle until like 2007, 2008. So if you think about having no precision guided munitions to then, hey, we have laser guided bombs, but GPS came much later.
There was a way to trick the packs into dropping JDAMs. And I think that we had, I don't know, practiced it once or twice out at with a kid on a dumb bomb that we couldn't even drop. But I don't even remember if we could do it then at all. But yeah, I was laughing actually, Junior, when you mentioned that you were dropping dumb Mark 82s. I had a mission in OIF in, about week 3 of the war where we, for some reason, had run out of paveway kits. And I, no kidding, took off with like a 6-pack of Mark 82s that ended up rippling on a tank column in CCIP, so strange, very strange. It was an interesting time, I guess. Very LGB-ish. It's fascinating as I'm kind of listening to what you guys are talking about, how fast the Strike Eagle has adapted to weapons changes and what a substantial change in the capability of weapons over its service life has been. Paco, did you do AGM 130 at all in addition to GBU-15s?
Yeah, it was the same upgrade. It was both put together.
Even in the early 2000s, that was considered, a special qual. So, you had a unique group of Wizzos and pilots that could do that. because it was so fancy of some sort. And then, here 10 years later, not even 10 years later, it was completely obsolete.
For those of you who aren't tracking, like GBU-15 is a TV guided bomb that the Wizzo in the backseat flies using basically a TV camera on the front of the weapon, and it sends a TV signal back to the jet, and so the backseater is literally flying the bomb into the target with the joystick, and then the AGM-130.
The Atari bomb.
The Atari bomb. And then the AGM-130 is they basically took that and they go, let's put a AIM-7 rocket motor and strap it to it.
Now, Junior, you guys were shooting AGM-130s in Allied Force when you were with the...
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. I actually shot a Maverick at weapon school, which was pretty cool because it's the only air, at least at that time, it was the only air-to-ground munition that the only rocket boosted munition you could launch from the back seat. So you got to hit the pickle button to see it come off the shaft, which was a lot of fun. But I was actually a big fan of Maverick, but that never went far in the Strike Eagle.
I mean, it's too bad we don't have any Mountain Home guys, because I think that they had Maverick on their list of employable weapons.
I believe they did. Yeah,
for pretty late into the program. I mean, at least into sort of the early 2010s. I don't know if that's
probably particularly the G model Maverick. As a guy in Alaska, focused on Korea. There were some targets in Korea that I thought G model Mavericks would have been a good answer. But we had a squadron commander at the time who hated GBU-15, was trying to kill that capability as quick as he could, and he didn't even want to hear about adding a new one. But he was eventually fired. So
we're talking about weapons,
but
we were talking about weapons and kind of how it's adapting and changing over time. But there's also like the tactics manuals and how we think about employing the jet. So I remember, and maybe it's back now, but I remember we basically like killed OCA out of there was no 3-1 OCA section. And every time you go to like red flag, it's like, hey, Strike Eagles, you guys are going to do OCA. It's like, okay, I guess hey, can we borrow the C model tactics manual and figure this out? But when like 9/11 happened and we get to maybe some early OEF stories, like there was the 3-1 for the Strike Eagle, like when 9/11 happened, had 1 page for CAS, and it was a chapter, I forgot, it was like chapter 9 or something, and it says close air support, this mission does not apply to the F-15E. Like that's the only thing it said. I was like, all right, next page. So the fact that because you have a platform and a community that has basically embraced change from inception and continues to do that. Obviously, the Strike Eagle played a massive role in the OEF and OIF. Yeah.
Well, certainly having the variety of backgrounds of guys coming into the airplane helped that, because I was in an operational squadron in 2001 and 2002 when we were thrashing around and trying to figure out how to do this thing. Gosh, I remember going through the B course in the Lancers in '99 and asking if we were ever going to go do Strafe. And I remember, instructors saying like, we don't do that. We never shoot that gun.
Great irony. The very first paper published out of the Strike Eagle Weapons School. Wham, do you know the answer to this? Here's trivia for $100. What's the very first paper published in the Weapons Review to come out of the Strike Eagle division was from Jim Grahn, Cubes, who was one of the 2 Val class instructors, stayed on, was one of my instructors. And his weapons school paper was on air-to-ground employment with the Strike Eagle with the gun. And everybody's like, what a waste, nobody's ever going to do that. So he was many years ahead of his time, but I'm guessing that, in OEF, there's probably some crusty old weapons officer saying, somebody dig out that paper. Maybe there's some good stuff in there.
Yeah, I've got probably, 10 or so combat strafe passes. Yeah, it's good. It's a good tool.
We had 2 guys who were at Seymour at the time who were former A-10 guys. And man, they were constantly, in the bar, kind of giving informal, here's how to do strafe stuff. Here are all the concerns with strafe. Just a lot of things that weren't necessarily part of the method of thought about doing any kind of surface attack at all. And there was a lot to learn. They even had a lot to learn, and they even admitted that they, how you did this in the Hog was a completely different deal. But there just wasn't a volume of experience in the community to draw from. So, man, during the year of 2001 and 2002, I'd love to go back to my logbook and see how many times I went to the range and strafed. There was a time, early 2002 where we always had a hot gun every single day. I remember doing BFM with a cold gun, but, with ammo loaded in the airplane, because we always had ammo in the airplane, because every time we went to the range, we were required to go do 20 and 30-degree strafe passes just to exercise the guns and get ourselves ready for that. So that was a monumental change, which obviously, we know from a number of great war stories over the, I guess 20 years that we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, of people having to whip the pistol out and being able to save friendly lives with that. So yeah, great example of how the airplane's been adaptive, both from a weapons perspective, but also from an aircrew perspective. Hey, Stinger, so they were making fun of you for a little while ago here with an air-to-air employment story. Let's fast forward to sort of the first kind of portion of the more modern era of Strike Eagle employment. So tell us about you going to do work in Syria, about what the whole purpose of the squadron being there was, and what you ended up doing, and then how that led to a bit of air-to-air employment.
And Wham was there too, right? You guys did that deployment together?
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Well, here, you guys can two-time it there, and tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yep. So OIR, or Operation Inherent Resolve, we're on the docket to go down there and basically fight ISIS. And also there's about, I don't know, maybe 6 to 9 different missions that were going on concurrently with the ISIS stuff. We had some pressure that we were trying to put on Iran as well. There was some pressure on Syria. There were some operations in South Syria that were designed to theoretically stop Iranian shipments of weapons in. There was some stuff in North Syria that was more of a counterterrorism operation. And then there was some support for the SDF or the Kurds in the north against ISIS. And then some operations, just counter ISIS operations within like Mosul all the way up to Raqqa, et cetera. So we had a variety of different missions to do. So close air support was kind of the bread and butter core mission set, I would say. But the other mission was DCA, so defensive counter air, and that was really protecting U.S. assets in a very gray area while we were operating in Syria, protecting them from both the Iranians via drone threat again, and then via or as well against Russia, and then Syria. So multiple different entities there. As far as the specific ROE and stuff goes, we weren't officially at war with Iran. We weren't officially at war with Russia. We weren't officially at war with Syria. We were officially at war with ISIS. So we had different ROE that applied to different actors, and then we had to adjust our self-defense ROE, what we were kind of comfortable with respect to all those things. So Wham can kind of fill in when we got to Syria, I think, or not Syria, but we got to Jordan to MSAB. Everybody hit crew rest essentially, and then got into this imminent ballistic missile or / whatever attack that was coming from Syria, and then Wham got all ready to do DCA, which our sim instructors and our instructors in the B course had told us that the Strike Eagle would never ever be loaded out with more than a 2x2 air-to-air loadout ever. It was unthinkable to do that. You would never do that. And as soon as we got down, they were loading them up like 7x1, so 7 MRMs and 1 SRM to go do DCA, which was another mission that had been kind of poo-pooed. It wasn't even a core B course mission at all. We had done like tactical intercept stuff, but DCA wasn't a pinnacle B course mission, and we didn't really train to it that often as well. We trained to a lot more of strike and air interdiction and cast and stuff. But anyways, Wham can kind of fill in the blanks on the first DCA stuff, and then we can get into the other stuff a little later if you want.
Yeah, Wham, I'd love to hear about that. It sounds just from Stinger's sort of intro there that there were some muddy, both political and tactical objectives going into that. Especially as from your resume there, it's your first ops assignment, right? I mean, were you relatively new to the game when you rolled into this, or had you deployed times before, and was this kind of old hat by that point?
So I'd been in the Bolus for 2 years at that point. The only deployment experience I had up to that was we did like an emergency thing to Turkey when the Russian fighter got shot down, but that was like my first like deployment to the desert. So, and to your point of like the murky ROE and stuff like that, yeah, we landed, got told from the AOC that like, hey, this is going to go down. You guys are going to fly DCA. Your crew rest now. And then we showed up 12 hours later. There's no ROE. There's like no plan for who we can shoot, when we can shoot on. It was, yeah, murky would be like an understatement for that first night. And then fortunately that kind of settled down. And then we settled into basically Raqqa was what we did for 6 months. The T-Bolt ahead of us took care of Mosul, and then we started in Raqqa. And at the beginning of the deployment, I think it was like 98% ISIS controlled. And by the time Stinger and I were leaving, it was basically done. I mean, we like destroyed their headquarters essentially, and it was down to single-digit percentage of ISIS left.
Didn't you guys drop like 4,000 bombs?
Yeah, it was, well, we fudged the number a little bit, but it was 4,492.
Yeah, that's right.
So
which is a record. That's one squadron, one deployment. That is insane. That's more than, I think at the time, it was more than any bomber squadron had dropped in like 30 or 40 years, right?
Yeah, it was actually a little bit, it was odd to come back with weapons on your jet, essentially. We were just coming back, cleaning off every single sortie for the most part. Yeah, it was cool. To Wham's point on the DCA stuff, though, to really understand how weird the situation was. Not only was there not ROE, but there really wasn't any tactical consideration to the threats that we would have been facing anyways, because we were still fighting a 1990s threat, with 1990s missiles and et cetera. Fast forward to this Russia threat that, we were technically doing DCA against, which was Su-35s, with their advanced missiles that we really hadn't even talked about, let alone trained against. And then there was a lot of intel gaps as far as what we could expect as well. So there's just a lot of confusion, about not only who do you shoot, but then how do you shoot them, and then when. It was mass. It was not quite organized, and really. The good thing about it was that the people that just happened to be in the bowlers at that time were actually really, really good at figuring out things on the fly and making stuff happen. So it was a great team to be with for sure for that deployment.
Did you have was the schedule split between CAS lines and DCA lines, or were you doing kind of flex flights, or how was that working out? Because even as you guys are telling the story, there's a lot of crossing over between the DCA and the CAS.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it depends on kind of how the ATO was fragged. Some people were fragged specifically for DCA in specific areas, but I think in almost every case, everybody got rolled to something else. There was always a tick going on. There was always something to where we would pull a DCA cap, or we'd, either maybe launch some guys early or roll guys from a CAS, from a JTAR that nothing was happening to do DCA, and then vice versa. So it was a lot of flexibility, which required our loadout to be very flexible as well. So we really had to think about what bombs we were carrying, what missiles we were carrying, and what the likelihood of using each, was. And it was interesting. We played along with it, played around with a bunch of different loadouts and figuring out what was good, what was bad. We initially had a lot of problems with SDBs from the Bruce 61 racks. They weren't working very well. They ended up working great like later on, and we kind of figured that out. But there was it was not without its problems. We had a lot of I think 152 fuses that were dudding out. So we had to sort through that. We had a bunch of other things, and then and we were flying with really trashy AIM-9 mics, which I think was just complete pieces of shit that we should have just thrown into a ditch and buried. because 4 hours in the desert with a 9 mic was just, it was a worthless piece of missile that you're just giving an incentive ride to in the desert pretty much the entire time. Luckily, the squadrons after us ended up getting 9Xs, which was huge, and just based on the way that they're cooled, was really big for that particular AOR. So.
I was going to ask, is the issue there that the nose glass was glazed over because of the sandblasting, or was it that the bottle didn't last long enough to cool for a long sortie?
Well, as you know, like as soon as you go master arm hot, right, then you start essentially blowing the bottles. So guys, since you're pickling off bombs all the time, I mean, it's not uncommon. It's just that by the time you use the seeker, that thing is just staring in the desert and not doing anything at all. At least that was my experience with it. I don't know, Wham, was that pretty similar?
Yeah, 100%. It was, like you said, a waste of the station based on like the environmental concerns and what we were doing there.
Wham, can you talk a little bit more about in this kind of murky environment, if you will, up against two different sort of adversaries, how did you manage a DCA vol while obviously your bros are kind of going hog wild on cast stuff?
And that first night one was one of the very few that I actually flew. Like the DCA, like Stinger was talking about, that kind of persisted was we typically scheduled that on a different line than I was flying.
Okay.
Like that was like our determined coverage because you had to have 24-hour caps. I didn't fly a whole lot for that one. The first night though, fortunately I was flying with Hoser Blanton, who was a black border patch and was the, like, I don't know, deputy OG or something. So being a brand new guy, I just kind of assumed he knew what was going on and he would be able to see through the murkiness. And it just ended up, like, fortunately we didn't have to do anything, but everybody was kind of in the same boat of, well, if this does happen, like, am I going to have to ask permission? Like, is somebody going to tell me? Because the ROE was not to the point where you could like have decentralized execution. Like, you were going to have to ask for permission, which is, I'm sure, what Stinger will talk about with his and the nightmare that it was trying to employ a missile. The air to ground stuff was extremely straightforward. That part was easy. It was the air to air that was pretty bad.
Before I get to Stinger's story, in terms of, I want to talk in terms of like doctrinal casts here. There obviously wasn't a FISL out there. Was it all, type 1, type 2 stuff out there? And who were you working with? Was it actual US units or allied units, or were you getting stuff from talks, and doing type 2 and type 3 stuff, or what?
Yeah,
it was mostly type 2.
Sorry, bro.
Yeah, from what I mean, it was type 2. I think I got type 3 like one time, but like the majority of the time, no, the JTAC that you were talking to was not there, on the ground with the SDF troops or whoever we were protecting. They were, back far away looking through a predator feed or whatever and controlling that way, which I found it pretty simple. I mean, it wasn't very difficult other than that, like at the time with CDE and all that stuff, the target engagement authority, like to say yes to a strike had to be like blessed by a 1-star or something like that every time we dropped a bomb. So there's a little bit of that background admin that kind of added some constraint to it, but it was mostly transparent on the aircrew side.
And was it GBU-39s like Stinger was talking about, or what kind of weapons generally were you using?
So I think the loadout we settled on was we'd have a CFT of 38s, 238s and 54. The center line would be either a 31 or 39s, depending on if you're number 1 or number 2. And then the right side CFT would either be 2 or 4 GBU-12s that we carried for the majority of the time.
I was one of the early combat droppers of the GBU-39 over in Afghanistan. The first droppers were somebody from Mountain Home. I don't know who exactly that was, but a couple of days after I got there in the bowlers, I had expended every single thing I had on the airplane, and the JTAC still wanted more. So reluctantly, I went to the SDB, and knowing that everyone in the world was going to watch this tape, when I hosed the bomb off, I was really surprised to see that it was a calculated 4-minute and 35-second time of flight. The JTAC was, I think it was a Polish JTAC I was working with ISAF, and he said, copy 35 seconds, negative 4 minutes and 35 seconds. So, obviously I was nervous if the bomb was even going to hit, and, did a full 360 around the targeting pod before the bomb actually shacked. And guess what? It went right through, exactly where it was supposed to be, but it obviously did, a flyby of Kabul and a show of force out there somewhere before it went to the target. Did you guys have any similar sort of bizarre employment of that? Or, and I've talked to Stinger about this before. It sounds like later on, some of those issues had been resolved from a software perspective and from a, an employment profile perspective. Do you guys have any issues like that?
Yeah, I think for the 39s, I only saw a couple of them go rogue and never come back, or was never able to see them. Usually we would have the standard problem where if one of them didn't work, the whole rack didn't work, for lack of a technical explanation there. But the go-to weapons for us really, the 38s, the 31s, and the 54s, 100%. The 12s were a little bit of a wild card. As a matter of fact, it really depended on the kit that we had. A lot of the drops that I found myself in was a lot of ticks and a lot of danger close ticks. And so the 12s were interesting because the general consensus at the B course at the time was that for a GVU 12 drop, you want as much airspeed as possible, or really ground speed for energy. However, with the Bravo kits that we had, what we actually found was, and there's a lot of experimentation that went on at the captain level that was not sanctioned by anybody, nor was it wanted by anybody except for the captain Mafia. But what we found was that some of the GVU 12s that had the earlier kits in them were actually better dropped slower if you could drop them. And what it would do is increase the flight path angle, which would keep a little bit more energy, and it would make the bomb a little bit more predictable, at least where it was hitting at. Whereas what we found was if we gave the bomb a lot of smash, it would end up usually falling short, running out of energy. And that was I only dropped maybe 100 GVU 12s, during that deployment. So that's that sample size. There are various kits, but a wider amount of Bravo kits. So I didn't really care for the 12s that much, to be 100% honest with you. The 54s could just do it better. And you didn't have to worry about, if you're working with dislocated JTACs, you really had to do some old windage guesstimations with the 12s about what it was looking like on the ground, and stuff. With 54, obviously you didn't have to do that. The 54, we could also adjust the fusing. We had 152 fuses on the 54s, which was critical to troops in contact, where we could either mitigate it or we can maximize the effect, depending on what types of targets we were going after. When we started hitting VBIDs or vehicle-borne IEDs, the 54s were absolutely clutch for that because of the way that they tracked movers. With the 12s, obviously, you have to have lead laser guidance with that, and there's a little bit of a concern when targets move and turn, that you're losing a shit ton of energy with that as well. So yeah, and the 31s were great. We flew with a lot of 109 kits, so the 31 V3s, so the penetrator kit on that, and we found that to be great because we could use it to mitigate blasts by burying it a little bit more. We could get into some of the buildings there. We'd come up with something called knee capping, which was another, I think it was a captain experiment that went on, where we would put a 31 at a 45-degree impact angle at the base of a building with say a 35 or 25 millisecond delay. It would bury in there and it would topple like a 5 or 6 story building down if we wanted to destroy that building. So it was interesting. Again, lots of weird experiments that went on, all within the ROE though, just to be on the record here.
Hacker, let me interject one thing before we lose the moment. I think it was Wham that talked about, hitting targets where you had to get a 1-star approval to hit it. And Stinger's talking about, the captain's Mafia experimenting. There's a huge danger, and I've seen it firsthand, of as we improve command and control, the ability for the KOC or whoever to kind of, reach into your cockpit and, decide what you're going to do, that we neuter the very capability that we've been trying to nurture. I saw it firsthand in 2003. I was the director of combat ops of the KOC. And, we were spinning up for, what we knew was going to be OIF. Didn't know what it was going to be called at the time, but it was pretty clear we were going to have a war. And everybody was focused on time sensitive targeting. And we had these processes in place from Southern Watch that, as soon as you wanted to strike a target, they'd shoot AAA and like, okay, we're going to respond. And that would start this, 45-minute process of the lawyers running up to the battle cab and talking to the two-star. And, the two-star really liked that. He liked the fact that, everything had to be laid out in front of him before he gave the go-ahead. And I just said, we can't fight a war like this. We can do this for one strike on one target, but we can't fight a major combat operation like this. And I made myself pretty unpopular in a non-career enhancing way as I was trying to drive home the point. We have got to shift gears if we're going to be able to operate the way we say we're going to for a major combat operation. But I don't know how much you guys are seeing that now, but it frustrates me when we don't take advantage of smart captains. I'll give you this example. We had one time we were going to launch 2 Vipers out of Kuwait to respond to a AAA engagement or something earlier in the day. And I'm sitting there trying to figure out, okay, what's their ordnance load and how should I refrag them, whatever. And then I realized, why the hell am I doing this? I know why I'm doing this, because I'm a patch wearer and it's fun, but it's not my job. And so I called up to the battle cab and said, hey, let's just frag this, best available ordnance, your call. They're smart guys. They'll figure it out. And I hacked my watch. 45 minutes later, the KOC director who'd been up there talking to the two-star said, okay, we're going to tell them how to suck the egg. I was like, no, we can't do this. But I'm curious if you guys have experienced that, or are we compromising our capability because we now have comms, back to someone 1,000 miles away?
There's no new lessons, right? It happened in virtually every conflict in the past 60 years in the United States. So it happened from Vietnam, even Odyssey Dawn. There's some really great stories about, they have like, hey, these harm shooters have to VID the target. I'm like, do you understand how a harm works? Like that's not a thing. When I was in the very first wave of OIR before it actually had a name. I think we were operating like 6 weeks before someone actually named it, in Iraq and then in Syria back in 2014. And that required it because we were going back into Iraq when we had zero presence. We had like no one on the ground. So it was very interesting. We had to have, for kinetics, not only a 3-star approval, the 3-star himself had to see a live FMV feed of the target. So you had to find and we have rover kits on the Strike Eagle, but you have to have someone close enough to actually pass that too. And these 3-stars, depending on what part of the region you're in, they all have different strike approval authority. So depending on what 3-star, that's not a 3-star. It's like, well, that's my region. That's the other 3-stars region. And then the ROE probably changed. We'd fly like 10 or 12 hour sorties, and from where we were at the time up into Iraq and Syria, and the ROE would change throughout the course of your sortie, but no one would tell us. And so I remember one time these people had dropped on some tanks, and they came back and like, oh, that was an ROE violation, and you have to go like talk to the KOC. Like, what do you mean? Like, well, the ROE changed like 2 hours after you took off. Like, well, how are we supposed to know? There was, some line, they kept drawing lines on a map of where you could and could not strike based on just the sensitivities. So yeah, it's a tale as old as time. Hey, when you guys were in 2017, did you have prox fuses on your 31s?
No, we didn't have any prox. Talk about the DSU kits. Yeah, we didn't have any.
Yeah. Oh man, in Afghanistan, that was the crowd pleaser. You have the 2,000-pound weapon and you could air burst, and that would that was one of my favorite weapons to drop. But you were talking about the GBU-39, the small diameter bomb. That thing, went through. There's the jet, the rack, and the bomb, and that was a weapon it has a crazy backstory. You guys don't care, but Hacker, you're talking about dropping the first ones. Like, it was never designed to do close air support, and so we probably put it through like 5 software updates during I kind of saw it at the very beginning where you kind of picked it up, and then all the way to the end. We were gonna get rid of them because we didn't need them, and they don't do a lot of things that we needed to do, we'll say, and so they're not useful in a whole lot of situations. So we were going to divest them, and we're on the way out. We were basically in sustainment mode. We dumped so much money into the software update to get them working, and that's like, nah, we don't need them. Well, when ISIS kicked off in 2014, because of these sensitivities, it was like, well, what's the smallest weapons that you guys can drop? And I'm like, well, like, we do have SCBs, but like, dude, we haven't touched those things in years. Like, well, how many do we have? And so then it became this like, hey, put the SCBs on the Strike Eagle. But we hadn't, I was a weapons officer on that deployment, and we didn't even really train to it at all, because it was like, we're not going to use STBs. And sure enough, it's like, hey, pull out the STBs. How many racks do we have? It started moving around in theater because some of them were different stockpiles, and so that ended up like bringing them back, and then we started dropping them. And then it's like, well, how many can you carry? And so we had some rack issues like Stinger talked about. Night one, the original night one strike into Syria, the original strike package was supposed to be 8 Strike Eagles with 160 GBU 39s. So like going from like one extreme, like you're not going to ever do this. And like, oh, hey, guess what? So yeah, I was the strike package commander for that. It ended up getting truncated to 4. We brought in some coalition partners, so we gave some targets up. But yeah, it was 4 Strike Eagles with 20 small diameter bombs apiece. So 80 bombs. I think it was like 69 pre-planned targets, and then a few for double taps.
So what I really want to know from that, Paco, is did all of the individual bombs do their all individually deconflicted flight paths that they talk to each other and all that fancy stuff that Boeing promised us they would do?
Nobody knows, and here's why. So that loadout, we were flying that loadout, but it was a pre-planned strike. We had all of these targets, so it was a interdiction sortie, and you had a PAX program, and you're going to push one button, and the whole jet would just like everything would fall off the jet, right? Well, so the story goes like number one gets they're basically all line abreast, but 1, 2, 3, and 4. And almost like within like 5 seconds of each other, number one pushes the pickle button. The release sequence starts. You can, and it's a very small bomb, but it's a very noticeable release because it's air pressure release, so it pushes it pretty far down. That's based on how it's designed for the Raptor. Well, and this is a night sortie, so you push the pickle button, and like a couple seconds later, all the displays just go dark in the jet. Like, what? So like some of them came off, some didn't. Number 2, pushes the pickle button. About 3 or 4 seconds later, all the displays go dark in the jet. Number 3, same thing. Number 4, same thing. So the release sequence was so long that it basically crashed the jet's computer. It had like a MUX bus overload and was never tested. It's a configuration that you can fly with. They flew with it, but no one actually said, hey, if we push the pickle button with all these weapons, what actually happens? So that took a long time and test after that deployment to figure. I think it took 2 years for them to actually get the money to run a test to then figure out why it didn't work. But never tested on the ground, never tested in the air. It was tested night one in Syria, and yeah, oops.
What a letdown!
Nobody ever tried that in the sim.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I know from the front end of this, as we were getting trained to use them, there was a whole bunch of capability of the weapon that, frankly, from our perspective as a CAS user, I just did not give a shit about. And that, I distinctly remember there was some PowerPoint slide that had 28 releases from one aircraft, and that all the bombs were all going to talk to one another at what sequence they were dropped, and they were all flying unique deconflicted flight paths. And I was like, this sounds to me like there was a bunch of engineers sitting in an office passing a hookah around, with, oh yeah, man, it would be great if they would do this thing, or so all of these capabilities that some engineer love, but as an end user, I really just didn't care about.
I will say it does some good stuff. For those who are not know what it is, it's a 250-pound weapon, but it has these little wings that pop out, so it kind of hangs upside down on the jet, and it's got a pretty good range, as Hacker alluded to. 4.5 minute flight time when you're dropping it. These things can fly for like 10 or 12 minutes, so it translates to about a 40 mile standoff, and it's not just in front of you. So we did a mission. We had GV-12s. I think we had 4 GV-12s, 3 GV-38s, and 4 GV-39s. And we had basically 2 strike areas. In Syria, we had like a near area, and then we had a far area that was way, way out in the northwest. And we were going to drop 38s on the far target, GV-12s in the near target, and we were going to roll to some dynamic stuff afterwards with the SDVs. Well, we get and do this like textbook. We're like, just because we could, we're like, we're going to go take out this building with GV-12s. Like, well, let's get a line abreast. It's like B Corps standard, line abreast. We're going to do simultaneous release, simultaneous impact, 2 spots on the same building. And I'm like, sweet. So we go do the attack, and the way that the attack direction had to be, we had this tailwind, and it was like 100-knot tailwind. And for whatever, I've never seen this before or since. We both weapons like shack, like boom, they blow up. We see the blooming in the targeting pod, and we're immediately start turning to go back to the west, because it was a west to east attack. We had to go turn about to the west, and as it's clearing, I'm like, that building doesn't have a scratch on it. Like the bombs must have, like, I don't know what happened, but like the building had not a scratch on it with these GV-12 attacks. So I'm thinking, and I was actually number 2. We were letting someone else lead, and or 2-ship. I was thinking, I was like, man, wait a minute. I switched PAX programs, and I looked down, and we're still in a LAR. We're still in basically a launch acceptable region of our GV-39s. And it was like 1 from 2, like set, whatever it was, program 5 or something. Two's in a LAR for reattack. And so we ended up dropping STBs for a reattack, hitting a target 10 miles behind us. We were flying away from it, pickled off the STB. It basically turned around and then glided 10 miles behind us and hit the target. And it was like 45 minutes later, after we went and did this long strike of GV-38s, we're coming back, and we were to get BDA, bomb battle damage assessment, and we cue the targeting pods, and it's like, that building's gone. Like it was just rubble from the rack of STVs.
I was going to cycle back, and Stinger was talking about cross range and energy on GBU-12s and being able to hit movers a little bit better with laser James. So I had a story from OIF in 2003. Two independent things happened with guys in my squadron. One, we had one who shipped off to weapons school the month prior to OIF starting, and so he's going to be at Nellis, kind of like Junior's story, missing the war. All the rest of the squadron's going to be off dropping bombs and doing things. And at the same time, brand new guy, new pitter, shows up in the squadron who's he actually finishes MQT while we're over there in Qatar, before the war starts. So he's the brand shiniest new of the shiniest new. And we did a lot of work against movers in OIF in 2003. And so, there was a huge amount of practice, obviously, going up to that with, what an appropriate axis for attack was. And, like what Stinger was talking about, how much energy we needed to put on the bomb to have appropriate cross range to hit a mover, and about how fast was it going to be and how much you have to lead with the laser and all that. And sure enough, week 2 or week 3 into the war, we get this brand new Lieutenant Wizzo who is attacking a semi truck, and man, I'll tell you what, he flies the bomb right through the freaking cab of the truck. It's one of the awesomest videos I've ever seen. Truck explodes and goes flying off the edge, and we share a lot of drinks afterward watching that video. So now fast forward to we redeploy back to Seymour after the war. And sure enough, here's our flashy new weapons officer, just fresh back from Nellis. And, guess what? His paper is on GBU-12 employment versus movers. And, so we're all in the squadron classroom in the vault, and he's giving his briefing on his weapons school paper and talking about this and that. And I forget what point it was in the briefing, but at some point, any questions? And from the very back row, where all the the newest of the new captains hang out. You get new guy Wizzo back there up there. Actually, what you're postulating didn't really work as well as what we used. And he, says whatever the word he goes. And I've got a really good video if you want to watch it sometime.
The laser JDAM, to Stinger's point, I think it still stands. Our deployment, Wham, remember Capone's moving target story?
Was it with ESA?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah. So I think they have the record for the fastest mover that's ever been hit, peacetime or combat. And that was it's one of those consecutive miracles. It was a night sortie. It was a HVT HVI, and he's fleeing and on like the world's straightest road. and I think it was in Syria. It might have been Iraq. It was Syria. Those two blend together now. So anyways, they yada, yada, yada drops this laser JDAM, which, by the way, the spec that it was designed to was to hit a 50 or 60 mile an hour move or something like that. And let's say like this was close to double the spec, and it shacked the target. So I think the actual speed is still sensitive, but let's just say it was over 100 miles an hour that a laser guided bomb hit a mover, which is crazy.
We are getting a really awesome list of questions here for the last 30 minutes of things. We still got about 20 more minutes before we go to the questions, but I think you guys are going to like answering some of these things here. Good work for the live chat, folks.
Hey, can we go back, Stinger? Since we have like 20 minutes left, Stinger, can you please tell? We weren't making fun of you. It's a really great story. It really is. Like, Stinger, can you tell us,
especially in light of the news, of
tell us your story about the time that you shot a drone down.
Oh yeah, well, I don't know if it's that great of a story, but we there's a place in South Syria called Tamf that had a ODA, or the Operational Detachment Alpha. So the Green Berets were down there. They were training a force called the MAT, which was a Sunni group that they were official story was they were countering ISIS. The Iranian regulars the IRGC, some elements of those, and then Syrian regulars had surrounded them and kind of encircled them. So we were there doing some sort of overwatch for the Americans that were there, as well as the Syrian like Su-22s and stuff would come in, would poke this zone that we called our own, as well as the Russians would come in with Su-35s and Su-30s as well. So in any case, we were just up there flying around, talking to the guys on the ground. They went to an outpost called Bowling Green, which was to the north, a little bit closer to the Syrian and IRGC front lines. There's some stuff that happened that is probably better told in a bar about the events that preceded that. But there were some kinetic activities that went on between both of those groups on the ground. In any case, we picked up a Iranian drone, so a 129, that was carrying what looked like these Iranian version of their Hellfire, and we suspected that they were probably going to hit that ODA team or hit the MAT, either one. We ended up picking those or tracking that, and we're trying to figure out where to shoot it down exactly, because technically it was Syria, it was their airspace, but it was our like protected zone. So we had this whole self-defense ROE discussion about whether it would be preemptive or reactive. The ROE guidance at the time was a very, very like, almost old school Vietnam style, to where in order to shoot somebody down, they had to have, killed your friend and still had ammo on there. And you had to visually identify that they were still pointing a gun at them, all that sort of stuff. That was pretty much the ROE that we were rolling with at the time. It was really designed to protect people from liability, throw that out there. So in any case, we picked this drone up, and we talked to the KAC about it, or talked to Taxi 2 really, and they said, don't do anything with it. We'll try some non-kinetics. And of course, non-kinetics are a lot more brochure than they are actual capability, in most cases. And in any case, it didn't work. The 129 launched its equivalent of a Hellfire at the ODA. So we ended up shooting it down with a AIM-120. We tried the AIM-9 mic, which of course did its AIM-9 mic thing and just went stupid. So went for the AIM-120. It was about a 4.5 mile shot ish on that. But before we did that, we had a flanker that had locked us up in about a 6,000 foot trail, so about a mile behind us. Our wingman, who actually became an F-35 patch later on, Boss Harvey, was out there. They actually found that drone. So to their credit, they deserve a lot of credit for finding it in their sanitization plan, et cetera. They had a flanker lock them up as well. So it was kind of a Mexican standoff. We were worried about before the AMRAAM pickle that it was going to spook the Russians into shooting. And there was this whole thing going on. The Taxi 2 told us not to shoot it down. We went back and forth with them for a while, and then just decided to go ahead and Fox 3. So we did that, ended up shooting it down, came down in a big fireball of wreckage, which was kind of cool to see. Kind of a close shot. The guys on the ground were obviously upset at the fact that they had been shot at by a Hellfire, and it was not a preemptive shot from us, which was something that we kind of take back as well, as that we should have just, in hindsight, just blasted it while it was still in Syrian airspace, or still outside the line or whatnot. So that's the short version of that story. I don't want to take up like everybody's time, but ended up shooting it down. Some events happened after that were not so great, that involved some other players that ripped us out, and then didn't engage a Su-22 that dropped some bombs pretty close to an ODA position, which then spurred a lot of resentment from the ground force to the AOC, which then caused a shift in ROE, which then later caused that fitter to get shot down in North Syria. So, which was I think a couple weeks after that.
That was the Navy guy, right?
So that's that.
Stinger, man, there's so many things, so many entry points on what you just talked about. Again, kind of back to a bit of the chaos and murkiness of exactly what your ROE are and what your whole purpose is there. What was the political behind, I mean, quote unquote political, what was the, I guess, what was the discussion with your weapons officer? What was the discussion with the AOC? What kind of came out of all of that? I mean, you described a couple of things, ripple effects, but what was the real lesson learned in terms of the Strike Eagle enterprise for that? Or were there any? Was it just sort of lost in the shuffle?
Yeah, it was probably lost in the shuffle, I think, a little bit. But what I gathered out of it was that no matter who thinks that they have SA on a very localized situation, chances are if you're the one who's there and you're the one who sees what's going on, you probably have the most SA about what's going to affect the forces that are actually there. There's kind of a big perception, I think, that goes like enterprise-wide, that the KAOC has SA over everything, and Taxi 2 has this wide-ranging sheet of coverage, and they know all things, and then you're not really read into this minor thing that's happening over here. You're not read into this bigger picture, or you didn't go to ACSC or whatnot. But in any case, there was a lot of baggage that we had from some of the work in Afghanistan when it came to ROE, and the fact that you needed, like Wham was talking about, the target engagement authority, you needed all this approval in order to do something. So you weren't, somebody else was going to tell you when to act, was kind of the bottom line there, right? And you really didn't have to make a decision for yourself. What we saw from that instance was that you got to make a decision and you got to do something. And when it involves dudes on the ground, like, you got to act. Bottom line, like, who cares if some board comes back later on and says you didn't consider this or you didn't consider that? Copy. copy all that. But that decision to act, I think, is super important, and it's something that we had grown into a complacency with. When we go out and we do flags in, Nellis, or we do flags in other places, the bad guys are the bad guys. It's very definitive. We're going to shoot these guys down, no matter what. We're going to LARP our way to doing that. And the ROE is very cut and dry, so decisions are already made for you about what you're going to do. When we go to Syria, there's so many gray players, and there's so much apprehension about escalation. Everybody thinks that your AMRAAM or your GV-12 or your GV-31 is going to start World War III. That there's a real apprehension about doing anything. That the seriousness of what you're about to do is going to shift world events somehow. And when it really comes down to it, it's really about your localized area where you're protecting the dudes on the ground, and you just got to protect them, at all costs. If that's the, if you're really concerned about U.S. lives on the ground and risk level and all that sort of stuff, you got to do what you got to do. Is kind of the bottom line. That's why I took away out of that. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody at all, but
yeah.
Well, my first thing I'm going to say is I have a little bit of experience about a board at 1G and 0 knots analyzing your decisions, and that sucks. But more importantly, Junior, does that answer your question, or what you postulated earlier about the reach back for the AOC and how that affects the guy at the pointy end of the jet?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can assure you the KAOC does not know everything. I remember getting one night, we've got sorties airborne. I think it was one of the multinational coalition of Vipers that were operating out of Manas. And one of them calls back, or relays back through AWACS wanting to know, am I cleared to drop? I'm like, I don't know. Did the JTAC tell you to drop? It's like, do you think I have more SA here 1,000 miles away than that guy does? I said, you need to talk to somebody with authority. That's a staff sergeant with a radio and a pair of binoculars, not a colonel sitting in a windowless room in Saudi Arabia. So it's just a mindset thing. I mean, as I think Stinger said, there's this great fear someone's going to come back and second guess my decision. So I don't want to. I don't want to stick my neck out. I want to be able to say, well, so-and-so told me to. Well, that's the wrong way to train a force if you want to be able to operate in a dynamic environment.
On my first OIF sortie, the last week of March of 2003, I think I was probably on the receiving end of one of those conversations that you're talking about. We went up to hit an area that was a Iraqi Republican Guard, a big marshalling yard of some sort, a lot of armor and SAMs and things all parked kind of on the south side of Baghdad that they were looking for us to tear up. And we had just done our very first pass when a group of SUVs drove into this marshalling area. And flight lead was a different Moon Doherty. And he calls back to the AWACS and says, hey, based on the ROE, we're obviously not CAS. We're well within the battlefield interdiction, whatever SCAR, whatever they're calling it at the time. And so we didn't have a JTAC to talk to. Instead, we said, hey, what do you guys want us to do? So we were kind of on the other end of that same question. And sure enough, we waited for 45 minutes while they figured out where a pred was that could come over and look at these civilian vehicles that had entered the area, and whoever was the officer on duty on the other end said, yeah, you can go ahead and keep striking. And meanwhile, guess what? We're up there trolling for AAA, getting shot at the whole time while somebody's, bringing coffee and a PowerPoint to a general somewhere to make a decision. So that was really shitty. All right. So let's fast forward then to the kind of the more bleeding edge of things. Obviously, we've seen that on both ends. What I do want to talk a little bit about is there's a couple of questions here that are coming up that are EX and future of the airplane that I want to save for the question mark. So that's going to be coming your guys' way here in a second. But I do want to talk just a little bit about some of this stuff that's happened in 2022. With Strike Eagles going to Eastern Europe with Ukraine and Russia. So can you give, Stinger, I know you were involved in that. Let's see, Wham, you were involved in that a little bit. Can each of you guys just talk a little bit about again, and I realize since it's an ongoing issue, there's a lot of things that you cannot talk about. You don't need to, mention specific locations or specific missions, but really the purpose of this is more that Strike Eagle is still a very relevant aircraft in current day operations. What kind of things are we being asked to do given the state of what its purpose is, or what the purpose of these deployments are in terms of the defense of NATO? Wham, you can go ahead and start.
Yeah, I mean, when Stinger and I were there when they actually crossed the line, so our whole intent of being there was to just essentially just protect NATO airspace. I mean, we just flew up to the border with a little bit of buffer so we didn't make anybody mad, and really just kind of hung out and watched things go on and make sure, the Russians weren't going to push into Poland and, push the line is essentially what we were there to do. It was overall pretty boring, which was good. We were on the hook for a very silly air-to-ground mission that they thought was going to maybe happen. So we had that kind of on the back burner the whole time as well, but that never came to fruition, which was a good thing. So it was mainly just watching the border and just kind of showing Russia, like, don't come into NATO airspace, just stick on the east side of where you are right now.
Was it a typical DCA type posture, or were you doing something different? I asked simply because, again, during the time that I was deployed in the late 90s and early 2000s, we were still doing a little bit of that Southern Watch, Northern Watch thing where we're going to do, I'm going to air quote DCA, where it's just really just patrolling down these lanes and being ready to smoke anything that crosses the line. Obviously, where you're talking about and the threat level is substantially higher than single Mirages or single MiGs that are crossing a latitude line. So what was kind of your footing, knowing that those are flankers flown by real BVS forces on the other side?
I mean, ours was, pretty constrained. I mean, there wasn't a huge fear that like Russia was gonna start shooting at us into NATO airspace and pop off World War III. We were there with some C model guys who were, I would say, itching to shoot, which was not very well received from kind of how we were looking at things. So I was a little nervous about that. But I mean, it was like DCA is almost like an over exaggeration of what we were doing. There were 3 different caps in 3 different locations, and you got assigned to one of them, went and hung out for 2 or 3 hours with live missiles and just kind of watched what was going on, and then came back to where we were operating out of.
There was a really interesting, I think, personality difference, which Wham kind of pointed out. A lot of it kind of had to do with, so the Strike Eagle community kind of, writ large had dealt with had interacted with the Russians on several occasions, whether it was in Syria, over the Black Sea or whatnot, right? So we were fairly, I guess, maybe comfortable in kind of a weird way, or we kind of knew what was going to happen. Everybody acted like they had been there before. I'll just say that much on that side. Whereas, it depends on who you get from, different platforms. That this is the most that they've ever, most that they've ever experienced. And for some people, it's the first time they've ever flown with live weapons. So you just get a lot of different types of apprehension on what went on. And for us, like what they don't really tell you is that how it all happened was that we went to Greece for a 6-week TDY that turned into a 6-month deployment. So all the wives and stuff thought we were going to, get home on time. And of course, Russia had to do their thing and we got extended. And then we were, bouncing around, but overall it was a great time. We had some really good times with good people, but I would say that despite sitting in the super mez of Eastern Europe / Belarus and everything, we, at least for me personally, I was more concerned about coming back to land at a 8,000-foot runway with, snow and low overcast ceilings, a high alternate, with a heavy, combat loaded out jet. Way more concerned with that than I was with, if we were going to start, pickling off all these AMRAAMs. So.
So some things never change. Some threats are always threats, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You just described a Bagram deployment in the winter.
All right, fellas. Well, we've hit our 90 minutes. This has been an awesome discussion, and I know I would love to take this another couple hours because you guys are all providing some great perspectives. I am going to move on here to, man, there are a ton of questions from the chat here. There's no way we're going to get to all of these in 30 minutes, so we'll try and bust through as many of these as we can. The first question, guess what? This is going to be mostly for Paco, but I think there's probably some Stinger wisdom in here as a 5th gen guy. So here's the question. It's from Bagels, and he says, do you think the EX is a good idea, or do you think a completely new airframe would be better?
Well, it depends on who's buying it, right? And how you want to use it. Short answer is yes. The US needs more iron on the ramp. So it's a really good aircraft if you're buying everything to go fight China. All the other things, I think if there's one takeaway from this conversation, how many different topics did we go down and talk through that just popped and we just figured it out? And so having a tool that, multi-tool, if you will, that can do a lot of different things, gives you the flexibility to do that. So I think that there's going to be an enduring need. F-35 is great. We need more of those too. So a Stinger may have a different opinion on force design. We can talk force design strategies if you want, but that's a short answer.
Well, I think the bigger picture a lot of people don't think about and gets lost in the discussion is that, you need a toolbox with multiple tools in it, right? We're not just talking about LO being the only important thing in any sort of attack asset out there. And obviously money is a question, and obviously force structure is a question. There's a lot of things to that. Stinger, what's your take? Having been a Strike Eagle dude who was behind APG-82, and now your view as a single seat 5th gen guy.
Yeah, so I think every 5th gen guy will tell you that LO or low observable stealth isn't going to win the war. Bottom line, it's not, you just don't strap on the magic pants and then nobody sees you and stuff. There's a lot that goes into it. So if anything that the 5th gen community has taught me, it's really been that an appreciation for all different types of assets in a theater, even more so than probably when I was flying the Strike Eagle. Now, I'll say that I'm a little bit, I guess, more bearish on the EX than Paco is, but really that comes down to the fact that I think that the U.S. Defense industry as a whole kind of has to get its shit together when it comes to procurement and acquisitions. And what I see the EX is a kind of a Band-Aid or a temporary solution to a almost cancerous problem that we have right now. And it's sort of kicking the can down the road to fill a problem set, which is iron on the ramp, right now. We can't do 70-year programs like that's it's ridiculous. So if you look at just kind of like aviation writ large here, we went from fabric wing biplanes to the SR-71 in about 49 years or so, which was a huge leap, right? So the first flight of the F-15A was in 1972, and here we are, with the EX in about that time frame, so about a 50-year time frame. So we have to do better, I think, and we do better through PPPE reform. And we can, we can nerd out to all the acquisitions bullshit. However, I think EX is a temporary fix to that. And at what cost are we kicking the can down the road? I don't know. I think it's worth a conversation to figure out. Is the F-35, a shit ton of F-35s the answer? No, I don't think so. Is a multi-billion-dollar NGAD program the answer? I don't think so. So I think a drastic restructuring of the enterprise and procure stuff is the answer. And I think that we'll probably see that in the CCA realm once we get into that. Hopefully we can shift our industry in something that produces value, not just insane costs.
I've got a guy I used to fly with who spent some time with Checkmate or Strategic Studies Group or whatever they're called these days. And a couple years ago on an airline layover, I had dinner with him, and I remember him posing a question to me that I'm sure you guys have thought plenty of times, but that is actually getting kicked around, obviously, at the higher levels of the Pentagon. And that is, how many fifth-gen fighters does it take to take out a drone swarm? There's has to be even a question of, what is the functional purpose of air dominance in a 2025 and beyond air battle? There's a lot of questions about even which direction that's going. So anyway, good question. I'm going to move on to a kind of a related question. Wham, this is kind of in your area, just simply because you're the guy who's going to be running forward with this. This is from Freeman, and he says, with the introduction of F-15EX, will there be adding more capabilities? I'm saying, I guess, missions also to the Strike Eagle. What changes in training would expect possibly with seed or deed mission? Basically, what kind of changes do you expect on the Strike Eagle front with EX taking some of the advanced missions?
So we actually spent a lot of time thinking about that at weapon school, kind of like we talked about with like the merging of the Eagle community and what that looks like, what the future of the Eagle looks like. And one of the guys there, Bain Caraballo, basically thought a lot about it and kind of wrote a paper that was the future of the Eagle. And it broke down to like 3 major mission sets of like DCA and doing counter CMD, standoff weapons, and then electronic warfare are kind of the 3 big things he sees as far as the future of the Eagle goes. So not necessarily piling on more and more things just because that's really untenable, like we already talked about from a training perspective. So with the capability that we have and that we're getting online with the EX, like where does our focus need to be, and kind of settled on those 3 overall tenets of what it'll look like.
Does that, when they have the 3-1 writing conferences, are we at the point right now where sort of everything is on the table, or not?
A little yes and no. This, the one that is 3-1 that I worked on the rewrite before coming here, and that's about to come out, was the first combined Eagle 3-1. So it applies to CE and EX.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a little bit of addition from the C model side, but it made me laugh earlier when Paco said the CAS chapter used to be 1 page. Like CAS is still going to be in there, but it's like an annex now, and it's focused on like those 3 major things like I was talking about. But I think it got a little bit bigger. I think we added a chapter or 2, but it's still moving forward. And the big win was a combined Eagle 3-1 for everybody.
Good. All right. On to the next. We've got Matt, either Matt Shopping or Matt's Hopping. Junior, I'm going to throw this at you. It says you briefly mentioned Mavericks. The question is, why were they not adopted? Well, we know they kind of were. I guess the real question is, why were Mavericks not more widely fielded on doc statements throughout the Eagle community, Strike Eagle community?
Well, certainly the Maverick in general was seen as a CAS weapon, and as we've discussed, we were not seen as a CAS airplane. It was for engaging tanks. Now, what I was pushing for a brief while until I was told to shut up was the G model Maverick, which specifically had some capability against non-CAS type of targets. And it just, it fell victim to just, there's only so many things you can do. We were doing GBU-15 at the time. There was no indication that was going to go away. So, adding, I was arguing that this is not a difficult weapon to employ, and it wouldn't be that much of a bear. But I from a perspective of maintenance and weapons loads and lines on the schedule and stuff like that, it would, it would have put more demand on the squadron. So I think that's the reason that it didn't last long. I think you're right that Mountain Home did have that in their dock for a while, and I can't speak to why that fell out. But as to why it didn't last, the big answer is just too many other things on the plate.
Wasn't there a configuration limitation? Because like the F-15 is kind of front to back ordnance wise, where like the Viper and the Hog are kind of side.
Yeah, I mean, when we've carried them at weapons school, I think we just had a single rail. In theory, you could put three on each wing station, but it was I've never seen a picture of a Strike Eagle carrying more than one or two Mavericks. So
Yeah.
I don't know if Mountain Home ever envisioned carrying six. That'd be a pretty heavy, draggy loadout.
So here's a follow-up for Matt's question. And this is, I mean, it's going to be rapid fire for all of us here. It says, if you had a free wish for a weapon to be adopted on the Strike Eagle, what would it be? I'm going to say 275 folding fin rockets, Junior.
Yeah, the last thing we need is more things on the plates. I can't think of a whole lot that there early on there were some things that I said, boy, I want that, but all those things showed up eventually. Yeah, there was nothing that I felt like we kind of missed the boat on.
Wham.
I would like the laser guided rockets that the Vipers have to be able to shoot
Okay.
UAS and CMD with.
Right on. Stinger.
Yeah, the APKWS was cool. I mean, you get Su-20s on there, right? We could just load up 4 and blast them off. But I think the 158 Charlies would probably be the biggest, linchpin for the strike to be effective.
Nice. Paco.
Well, I got to pick something different. So I'm going to go with the AIM 174.
Ooh,
Ooh.
nice. That's a good one.
Nice.
Fun. Well, now that it's out in the wild, that was a very classified program for many years. What was being developed, the Air Force had an opportunity to actually like go in with the Navy on it and integrate it on. And for internal reasons, politically, the Air Force decided not to pursue it for the F-15 because it was seen as a 4th generation aircraft, and this would be a program going into a 4th gen, not a 5th gen. So because it could not fit on a 5th gen, for that reasons, the Air Force was out. So I wish we would have gone back in time and fixed that.
Yeah, I mean, we're not looking good in the shower, right? When the Super Hornet pulls up and is rolling with 4 of those or 6 of those. I don't remember what they have 4 in that picture that they just released recently.
Yeah, I think you're doing like max carriage envelope testing is why it's flying around with that. But yeah, that's a baller configuration.
All right, so now we have a question from Jin, and he asks, what is the realistic role of the Strike Eagle in an era of emphasis on stealth and survivability in highly contested SAM threats such as the S-400? So,
oh boy,
high observables in a double-digit SAM world.
Well, I just be clear, like it's all relative. Like, what is observable? Right? It's like Stinger's point. Like nothing is invisible. And there's spectrums, there's bands and aspects and things like that. And that's just like RF. There's IR. There's like, if you're moving through the air, you are disturbing molecules. like something somewhere is going to be able to see you, whether it's like, maybe not tomorrow, maybe next week, next year. So there is a role to play for a stand-in versus standoff, and I actually hate those terms. We were actually at a force design a conference for Air Power Futures last week with some Air Force leadership talking about how they're thinking about that. And long story short, like everything has a role to play. They all work together as a team. If you fielded an NFL team of just quarterbacks, they wouldn't be really good at running routes, or your defensive, like your linebackers, you wouldn't be very good at, doing other things. So it's all about putting everything together as a team. So definitely have a role to play.
I have a great story along those lines. When I was a wise-ass major at Naval War College at Newport, the CNO was speaking to us, and he was talking about the JROC process, the Joint Requirements process. And I stood up in Q&A and I said, the Air Force is building a new airplane, the F-22 at that time, I said, which is built from the ground up with the assumption that you must be low observable to survive in the 21st century. And the Navy is planning to buy, at that time, like 3,000 Super Hornets. Super Hornets. And I said, how does the JROC reconcile those two requirements? I said, one of them must have a fundamentally flawed view of the threat environment. And he got his, top hat and cane and did a little bit of tap dance there. And then he said something about, well, maybe some high threat environments where we need the Air Force with our LO assets to go in and knock down the threat. And I was like, did he really say that? The Navy, which has been, beating its chest for 40 years about, we're the first ones on the scene, before anybody else arrives or whatever. And now you're saying you got to wait for the United States Air Force to come kick down the door. So I'd like to get that one in writing, but unfortunately it was, school, so it's a non-attribution environment. But yeah, it was hard to see how do both of those make sense, but goes to show that the services don't necessarily see the future the same, and the JROC has no authority to force them to see it the same.
All right, here's a question from Rocket Propelled Guy, and this is probably more in the realm, Junior, for you and me, but it's talking about a pre-NVG world with the Strike Eagle. It says, was the overlaying of the nav FLIR onto the HUD combiner something you used all that much? And I'll say in the early days of the airplane, absolutely. That was providing an amount of SA that was not really previously available. But once NVGs came along, obviously there's a little bit of difference in terms of what the Lantern nav FLIR is looking at in terms of the IR spectrum and what NVGs are looking at. So they're a little bit of a force multiplier. So for a while, I guess there in the time frame I was in the airplane, sort of the 2010 timeframe, still used both, and it was an SA multiplier. Junior, where were you coming out of the 111 and having that?
Well, certainly, when the FLIR was a godsend compared to doing TFR in the 111, where it was darker in the inside of a cow. That was not a good feeling flying close to the ground at night. So yeah, the FLIR. In fact, one of my concerns. I was the first Lantern instructor, and one of my concerns was guys were getting way too comfortable just flying around looking through the FLIR. Like, that TFR is there for a reason. The FLIR is not going to see power lines and things like that. It certainly made flying low at night comfortable for a whole lot of people. And then of course NVGs, just opened it up, much greater, better field of view and whatnot. I do war story. We were doing intercepts one night out over the North Sea, and thought we were running on our wingman. It turned out we were running on some poor helicopter that was coming back from an oil rig or something, and we finally figured it out when the front seater finally turned up the nav FLIR, because he wasn't showing up in the NOGs, but he did show up on the FLIR. And that was sort of a lesson that, we had sort of pushed aside that technology because we had this new toy. So I can't really speak to how well integrated they are nowadays. I mean, you're right. You got two different tools in the toolbox, but at least when I left the airplane, there was no quick and easy way to integrate those two sensors so that you were, you got to choose one or the other to look through.
Yeah, I think it's a paperweight.
Yeah, I mean, so now in the world of helmet-mounted sight and panoramic NVGs and things like that, you even turn it on? Does it have any function?
So it's probably in a 10-year discussion of just taking the pod off the jet. It's actually not, all the parts are obsolete. The companies that are no longer in business. And so I think even if you divest it, so here's the weird thing. Most of the pods flying around on the Strike Eagles today don't even work. So there's just no parts anymore. The readiness is pretty low. And I don't even know if they still train to them anymore, honestly. But the reason they're still on the jet is the way the airflow is. So you have to have something there. You either take both pods off or put both pods on. And there's some weird things where you can fly with one pod, but it's mostly just a counterweight right now. Wham, is that the state of the art right now?
Yeah, wholesale agree with it is a paperweight.
So if that's the case, then TF radar use at all, yes or no?
No, that's broken too. Like it's all mostly paperweight. I've only used it once ever in combat during the day, interestingly, to actually let down through some haze and doing a tick in Afghanistan. But that's the only time I ever used it.
Hey,
so you don't. Is it trained to at all anymore? Is any kind of low altitude employment, part of, do you do it in the B course anymore?
I'm too far removed from that. Wham.
Yeah, I don't think it is anymore.
So, hey, Hacker, I was just made aware that the bowlers and the T-bolts are in MSAB watching this podcast from the
Oh, boy.
bar Pyros. So a good shout out to them. Cold and Dice are there, I guess, commenting on Wham's hair. So it's good.
Oh, that's awesome. That made my day. That's awesome.
Well, shit, maybe we should sing some songs before we, forget it.
Yeah. Only the good ones.
I've still got a hymnal around here somewhere.
Let's see, Dan, we're coming close to the end here. A couple more questions. Well, here's one. Has the TF been used in combat post-Operation Desert Storm? Sounds like the answer is no. Here's one generally for the group. This is, how does Type 1 or Type 2 CAS work with an RPA JTAC? Anybody worked with an RPA JTAC?
Yeah, Type 2 all day long. Like, I think 95% of all close air support over the past 15 years has been Type 2 control. Type 1 is like mostly academic. It doesn't make sense for a lot of reasons. Type 2 is when you can see the target or the platform. So it's like either or. So you can have like when we were in Iraq and Syria, our JTACs were in the United States. So they're not even the same hemisphere. So yeah, do it all the time. It's the power of our communication and coordination allows us to do it.
Now, is that capability you're talking about, Paco, is that them watching remotely from some sort of UAV asset, or are they watching your pod feed?
When I left, you could not push your rover, your FMV feed beyond visual range. It had a line of sight limit, but you could relay it to another platform who could relay it. So you could do
that was kind of my question.
You could do that, or what we did is you'd phone up an MQ-9 to come over and hang out, and then they would hey, laser spot track. So you'd fire the laser, cue their sensor, and so like the JTAC could see it through the MQ-9, and then he would give you strike approval.
All right, I'm holding this one on here to last. We have just a little over 5 minutes ready to go, and this last one here has to do with kind of one of our responsibilities as military aviators that we take real seriously, and that is mentorship. So this is a question that says, what advice do you have for us trying to get pilot and WISO slots, and how to be competitive for it? So let's go through everybody. And obviously I realize most of us are well away from the officer accession process. And obviously it's, it's probably changed from when all of us have gone through that. But, I know in what I do in my hobby, I fly World War II airplanes around and do, living history flight experiences. And I run into a lot of people who ask me this question. So I take it pretty seriously, trying to give people a bit of vector who want to follow in our own footsteps. I'm going to go, Paco, you start.
Oh man, I was hoping you'd pick me last.
You've been last on all these, so you get to go first on this one.
What advice would I give someone? The short answer is don't suck. Which is not terribly helpful, but it's true. Find something to get good at and get good at it that shows that you can actually learn something. And so, breadth versus depth kind of thing, and then be able to apply that to something else. So I think the superpower that aviators have, the dirty secret, is that we're able to comprehend a large amount of information, make sense of it, and then act on that information. And building up the skills and the tools and the tool chains in your mind to be able to do that, you have to start somewhere. So learn a new hobby, pick something that's so far off of outside your wheelhouse, and show that you can start picking up those attributes. Because the things that I've seen that have made the most successful people in the flying community, military aviation, are the ability to comprehend things that they've never seen before. So to your point about the weapons officer, dirty little secret, most of the things your tier 1 weapons officer is dealing with, he has never seen before.
Right.
But he has the tools, and he's been trained by other people who provided that mentality and the process to, like, how do I solve this problem that I've never seen before? And I think that's what makes us great.
Right on. Stinger, man, I was there when you put your lieutenant's bars on. I was there when you put your pilot's wings on. You and I have been friends for many, many years, and we talked about a lot of stuff over the years. So now it's your turn to pass that on to somebody else. What advice do you have?
Yeah, so I mean, if I can make it, anybody can make it. I'd say that much. So you don't really need a resume. You just need, I guess, just the biggest thing, probably, at least, from my perception here, is don't give up and don't believe that you're out of the fight when in fact you're not. So you can keep on fighting. As far as all the qualifications and stuff goes, obviously, if you're trying to get into a guarded community like ours, you're going to have to meet, with the gatekeeper, and that's really the board when it comes to getting good, a good GPA or good scores on your, AFOQT or whatnot. And then to Paco's point about getting some experience outside of that, being an expert in something else is huge. Getting into aviation, one thing that I saw, like kind of just going through the pipeline stuff, was that, everybody loves the idea of flying a fighter, but some people don't actually like it when they get there, believe it or not. So I think getting some aviation experience is a good thing. Just making sure that, you actually enjoy, flying, enjoy all that sort of stuff. If that's where, you want to go, as far as being a fighter pilot or a fighter wizzo, I think that's key. So don't give up, and then try to do the best you possibly can to get yourself in a good position as far as getting good scores, getting aviation experience, becoming an expert in something, and thirdly, not giving up. So sandwich.
Wait a minute, that was
that's
don't
it.
give up.
Don't give up first.
Don't give.
Yeah, do good, and then don't give up. Yeah, there you go.
Don't suck is kind of the summary of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's the 3-1 derivative of that.
Yeah.
Wham, what you got? What's your wisdom?
I was an OTS guy, so like everything Stinger just talked about is exactly what I was going to say. I think the most important thing was recognize the things that you can control and that you have influence on, and ensure you like max all of those things out. So whether that be something as simple as the FOQT or your GPA or whatever, like the stuff that you are in control of, then just do the absolute best you can with those kind of things and set yourself up for success.
Right on, Junior. What's your look back over a long and distinguished career there, and a wide variety of things that you did?
Well, I would echo everything else that's been said. I mean, there's only so much you can do to prepare for something which is going to be very, very different. I guess you could play DCS, Strike Eagle, or whatever. Get good at managing a lot of different sensors and inputs and stuff. But broadly speaking, I would say be disciplined. That demonstrate that you have the discipline to stick with something hard. It just takes a person that's willing to really put their nose to the grindstone. I mean, going through weapons school is usually not a terribly pleasant experience. Looking back on it, you go, wow, that was great flying and I really enjoyed it. But boy, at the time you're working your ass off, and it takes a lot of discipline. So it's just, building that kind of resilience in whatever you're doing in life, to stick with things through thick and thin, even when it gets hard and unpleasant at times.
Right on. I echo everything you guys are saying. I had some good mentors when I was both a college student, ROTC student, and I did not get a pilot slot right out of ROTC, but I had two pretty old school mentors. One of them, old Vietnam vet that you guys have probably read books from, Ed Rasmus. Who I knew through the Red River Valley Fighter Pilots Association, and another Colonel Vietnam vet, Jim Evans, who's unfortunately long gone too. But the two pieces of advice that those guys gave me were, number one, make them tell you no. So keep asking until you get the answer that you want. And then the second one is, everything's waiverable.
Hey, Hacker, I think we're pretty much at time. I did want to spend like 30 seconds or less. So
Go for it. Yeah.
Not advice from people trying to come in, but maybe some advice for people who are in, and a little bit about good leadership, bad leadership. And this message is directed at all the bros at the squadron deploy that are watching this. 3 things you keep in mind: you got to be good on the ground, you got to be great in the air, and be a legend in the bar. That's it.
Right on. Well, we've been pretty legendary here tonight, I think, right? Maybe we've been adequate. It's been good. It would have been better if we would have had some alcohol, so a little bit of social lubricant. But man, it was really, really great to hear your guys' perspectives. Thank you for coming out and spending your time. Hopefully we can do this again sometime. Parting shots to anybody before we go back to Steve.
Thanks to you, Hacker, for moderating, and thanks to Steve for putting this together. Looking forward to the new book.
Right on. Steve, tell us about your book before we go away. That's the whole reason why we're here tonight.
Well, first of all, it sounds like I'm out of a job, so it's just as well. You have a full-time job and you won't be able to pick this up. But so yeah, Strike Eagle book, Be Afraid of the Dark. It's part of a 2-series book, hardback coffee table book on the Strike Eagle. Part 1 is 1978 to 2001, and then part 2 will be 2002 until present day. So it's available on the website 10percenttrue.com, and if you're interested in buying it, then please go ahead and pick up a copy. But really what I wanted to say was that this is exactly what I had hoped it would be. Listening to you guys talk has been phenomenal. It's been everything that I know the audience wanted it to be as well. In fact, we've already got people in the audience who are asking if you would come back and do another one. They want bar stories, they want alcohol. There's definitely more to talk about. And actually we had, so we didn't know how it was going to go. So Hacker and I had a go-to list of questions that we asked you all to prepare for. We never even got around to asking those questions, but they would also provide some excellent conversation topics. So if you can find the time at some point in the future, I would definitely make the time to do this again. Gents, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate your time. Thanks to the audience for joining in, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, guys. America.
America.